Have you ever wondered why your sexual fantasies and desires are so powerful? Why sometimes they seem to completely control your life, while at other times you can resist them with almost superhuman strength? Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychoanalysts, discovered something astonishing. Our most intense sexual impulses aren't just temptations or distractions. They are divine tests. They are spiritual trials disguised as flesh and pleasure. The individuals who face the most overwhelming sexual desires aren't spiritually weaker, as many religions suggest. They are, in fact, those chosen by God for the greatest internal battles. Discover why your libido might be the divine training ground for your soul, and how to transform your greatest vulnerability into your greatest spiritual power. Sexual desire speaks to us in a language few truly understand. It whispers through our dreams, erupts in unexpected moments, and sometimes overwhelms us with its intensity. Carl Jung recognized that this powerful force isn't random or merely biological, sophisticated code that carries profound spiritual messages. Jung discovered that our sexual impulses often represent something far deeper than physical attraction. Behind every fantasy and desire lies a symbolic communication from what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypal experiences that transcends individual minds. These aren't just urges to be suppressed or indulged without thought. They're invitations to self-discovery and spiritual growth. Think about your own desires for a moment. Have you noticed how they change throughout your life? How certain people trigger inexplicable attractions? Jung would say these moments aren't coincidental. They're precisely calibrated encounters designed to trigger specific aspects of your psyche that need attention and integration. The divine speaks through the body because it's the language we're most likely to notice. While we might ignore subtle intuitions or dreams, sexual desire commands our complete attention. It creates a state of heightened awareness where we're fully present and receptive. This is why God chooses this channel for communication with those who have important spiritual work to accomplish. Jung observed that the most spiritually significant people often experience the most challenging sexual temptations. These weren't punishments, but opportunist sacred invitations to face their own internal divisions and heal them. The stronger the desire, the more important the psychological material it contains. The process begins with awareness. When powerful sexual feelings arise, Jung would encourage us to ask, what is this attraction really about? What quality in this person fascinates me? Often, we're drawn to qualities we possess, but have denied or rejected in ourselves. The object of desire becomes a mirror reflecting our own hidden potential. This doesn't mean all desires should be acted upon, quite the opposite. Jung emphasized that understanding the symbolic meaning behind desires often removes the compulsive need to physically express them. By recognizing what these urges are truly asking for, perhaps connection, validation, power, or nurturing, we can address these needs directly rather than through displacement. Consider how many people remain trapped in cycles of addiction and shame because they never learn to decode their desires. They fight against these feelings or surrender to them without understanding the deeper message. Either approach misses the divine opportunity hidden within the experience. Jung believed that sexual energy, when properly understood, becomes transformative spiritual power. This isn't about suppression, but transmutation, changing the form of the energy while preserving its essence. Artists, mystics, and creators throughout history have channeled their sexual energy into works of profound spiritual significance. The strongest soldiers in God's army aren't those who never feel desire, but those who learn to work with it consciously. They recognize temptation as an invitation to wholeness rather than a test of willpower. They understand that each challenging sexual impulse contains precisely the energy needed for their next stage of spiritual development. This process requires honesty and courage. We must be willing to look at our desires without judgment, understanding that even the most disturbing fantasies contain important psychological information. Jung called this shadow work the integration of aspects of ourselves we've rejected or denied. What makes this journey so challenging is that we've inherited centuries of confusion about sexuality. Religious traditions often demonize desire without providing tools for understanding it. Modern culture swings to the opposite extreme, encouraging expression without meaning. Jung offers a middle path, conscious engagement with desire as a spiritual practice. When we begin to see our sexual impulses as divine communications, everything changes. Shame diminishes, self understanding deepens, we develop a more authentic relationship with ourselves and others. Most importantly, we reclaim the spiritual power that has been locked in misunderstood desire. Now that we understand how sexual desire serves as a divine coda symbolic language through which God communicates with us, we can explore why some people experience these messages with such overwhelming intensity. This isn't random or merely biological, as Jung discovered. The deciphering of desire reveals a profound spiritual principle. The strongest souls are given the heaviest burdens precisely because they have the capacity to transform those challenges into extraordinary spiritual growth. As we saw in the language of desire, these powerful impulses carry messages from the collective unconscious, but why do some receive whispers while others face thunderous demands? Jung's work suggests that the volume corresponds directly with spiritual potential. The divine communication system calibrates itself to the receiver's capacity for transformation. This explains why many deeply spiritual individuals throughout history have documented intense sexual struggles. These weren't signs of spiritual failure, but evidence of their important role in the divine plan. The fire of desire, same symbolic communication we explored earlier, burns hottest in those who have the potential to channel that energy toward the highest spiritual accomplishments. Jung observed that psychological growth follows a pattern of tension and release. Without the tension created by powerful desires, there would be insufficient energy for transformation. It's similar to how a bow must be drawn back with considerable tension before the arrow can fly toward its target. Your sexual desires create precisely the psychological tension needed for your soul's journey. The intensity of temptation corresponds directly to the importance of the lesson it contains. When particularly powerful desires arise, it signals that something crucial is being brought to consciousness, just like the symbolic communication we discussed. These moments represent spiritual crossroads where profound choices must be made, choices that will shape not just your sexual expression but your entire psychological and spiritual development. This understanding completely reverses traditional religious thinking about temptation. Rather than being punishments or signs of spiritual weakness, intense desires are markers of spiritual potential. They indicate that God has selected you for important work that requires the integration of powerful energies, the very energies. Recognizes divine messages in our exploration of desire's secret language. Jung discovered that the psyche naturally seeks wholeness through a process he called individuation. This journey involves reconciling opposing forces within our self-conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. Sexual desire often represents these opposites, seeking reunion, creating an alchemical process of transformation. Consider how some of history's most significant spiritual figures underwent profound sexual temptations before their greatest contributions. These weren't distractions from their path, but essential preparation for it. The energy they learned to work with through these trials, the symbolic language they learned to decode, became the very power that fueled their spiritual accomplishments. One of Jung's most revolutionary insights was recognizing that repression of desire doesn't eliminate its power. It simply drives it underground, where it grows more distorted and potentially destructive. True spiritual strength isn't demonstrated by avoiding temptation, but by facing it consciously, understanding its message, and transforming its energy, exactly the process of deciphering the divine code we explored earlier. The most intense temptations often arrive at crucial developmental thresholds. Just before a major breakthrough in consciousness, the psyche typically presents its strongest resistance. This resistance takes the form of amplified desires that seem to pull us back toward familiar patterns. Recognizing this timing helps us understand these moments as growth opportunities rather than setbacks. Jung observed that sexual energy and spiritual energy are deeply connected there, essentially the same force expressed at different levels. This is why sexual desire often intensifies during periods of spiritual seeking. The energy being awakened doesn't know initially which channel to flow through, creating a temporary amplification of sexual impulses, making the divine code speak even louder. This connection between sexual and spiritual energy explains why both sexual obsession and religious fanaticism can appear in the same personality. Without conscious understanding, the energy swings between extremes rather than finding healthy integration. The goal isn't elimination of desire, but its proper direction and expressional mastery of the language we've been exploring. Those facing the most challenging desires aren't being punished, they're being prepared. Their struggles are forging the psychological strength needed for important spiritual work. Just as physical muscles develop through resistance training, spiritual capacity grows through successfully navigating these internal tensions and decoding their messages. The strongest soldiers aren't chosen because they're already perfect. They're chosen because they have the potential to transform their greatest challenges into their greatest strengths. This requires vulnerability, honesty, and courage, qualities that develop through facing rather than avoiding our deepest desires and learning their secret language. Understanding this principle transforms how we view our most difficult moments. When overwhelming desires arise, we can recognize them as evidence of our spiritual significance rather than our failure. We can approach these experiences with curiosity rather than shame, asking what important lesson is being offered through this particular temptation. Continuing the decoding process, we've begun to understand. This perspective doesn't make the journey easier, but it gives it meaning. Your struggle with desire isn't random, suffering its purposeful development. The very intensity that makes it challenging also makes it transformative. Through this fire, God is forging the spiritual strength needed for your unique contribution to the world. Speaking through the powerful language of desire, we're now learning to understand. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes. A data link is in the first pinned comment below. As we've discovered, God assigns the heaviest sexual burdens to the strongest souls not as punishment, but as opportunity for transformation. This divine trial by fire now leads us to explore one of Jung's most powerful concepts, the shadow. R, 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 R. We'll see how those intense desires that feel most troubling actually contain the raw material for our greatest spiritual evil. The shadow, in Jung's understanding, is the part of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or hidden away. It contains everything we don't want to admit about ourselves, including our most primitive sexual impulses. These aren't flaws to be eliminated, but essential aspects of our wholeness waiting to be redeemed and transformed. The more we resist acknowledging these impulses, the more power they gain over us. Remember how we learned that the strongest temptations signal the most important spiritual work? This is precisely because these desires reveal the shadow material most crucial for our growth. When certain sexual thoughts or feelings make us uncomfortable, it's often because they're showing us parts of ourselves. We've disowned parts that contain tremendous untapped energy. Jung discovered something remarkable. The shadow doesn't just contain our darkness, but also our unlived light. Those powerful sexual impulses that seem most troubling often carry our greatest creative potential, spiritual gifts, and authentic power. This is why God chooses this challenging pathway for his strongest soldiers, because hidden within their most difficult desires lies their most profound spiritual capacity. Think about how often religious traditions have taught us to fight against desire, creating an internal war that drains our energy and fragments our souls. Jung offered a radically different approach. Instead of battling against these impulses, he encouraged us to turn toward them with awareness and curiosity, asking what they're trying to show us about our wholeness. When we stop fighting our shadow and start understanding it, something miraculous happens. The energy that was locked in repression becomes available for transformation. Those primitive impulses that once felt threatening become the very fuel for spiritual growth. This is spiritual alchemy turning the lead of our most troubling desires into the gold of conscious living. Many people remain stuck in cycles of shame and indulgence precisely because they never learned this transformative approach. They either suppress their desires until they erupt uncontrollably, or they act them out mindlessly without understanding their deeper meaning. Both approaches miss the divine opportunity. Hidden within these experiences the chance to transform primitive impulse into spiritual power. Jung observed that our most intense sexual desires often reveal our deepest wounds and greatest strengths sometimes simultaneously. For example, a desire for dominance might reflect both a childhood experience of powerlessness and an untapped capacity for healthy leadership. By working consciously with this energy, we can heal the wound while claiming the gift, transforming primitive impulse into spiritual authority. This transformation doesn't happen through willpower alone. It requires honest self examination, compassionate understanding, and a willingness to see the divine purpose even in our most troubling impulses. When we approach our desires this way, they gradually lose their compulsive quality and become integrated into our whole being. One powerful way to work with shadow material is through what Jung called active imagination, a process of engaging consciously with the symbols and energies arising from our unconscious. When overwhelming sexual desires emerge, we can ask them directly, "What do you want from me? What are you trying to show me? What spiritual quality are you pointing toward?" This dialogue transforms our relationship with desire from adversarial to collaborative. People often worry that accepting their shadow will lead to acting out harmful impulses. Jung found exactly the opposite. It's repressed desires that become distorted and potentially destructive. While conscious engagement with these energies leads to their healthy integration, the strongest spiritual warriors aren't those who never experience darkness, but those who transform it through awareness. This integration process explains why some individuals emerge from intense sexual struggles with extraordinary spiritual gifts. Having faced their own darkness, honestly, they develop unusual depth, wisdom, and compassion. Their hard-won self-knowledge becomes a light for others. This is the divine purpose behind the trial by fire, creating spiritually mature individuals who can help others navigate their own shadows. The shadow to light transformation also explains why sexual energy and creative spiritual energy are so closely connected. They draw from the same primal source. Artists, mystics, and visionaries throughout history have discovered that their creative power increases dramatically when they learn to work consciously with their sexual energy, transforming primitive impulse into inspired expression. As we integrate our shadow, we move beyond the exhausting inner conflicts that drain our spiritual energy. We stop fighting against ourselves and start working with all aspects of our nature. This integration creates a profound inner peace, not because we've eliminated our primitive impulses, but because we've transformed them into allies on our spiritual journey. Having explored how our shadow contains both our primitive impulses and our unlived potential, we now encounter another dimension of Jung's understanding of sexual desire, the inner marriage. Those powerful desires we've been transforming aren't just about external relationships, they're about a sacred union happening within our own souls between what Jung called the anama and anama. The anima represents the feminine aspects within men, while the animus represents masculine qualities within women. Jung discovered that regardless of our biological sex, we all contain both masculine and feminine energies that seek relationship and integration. This internal marriage forms the foundation of our wholeness and connects directly with the shadow work we've been exploring. Our most intense sexual attractions often reveal which aspects of our inner masculine or feminine nature need attention and development. When a man feels powerfully drawn to a nurturing, intuitive woman, It may indicate his own inner feminine anima seeking expression. Similarly, when a woman feels attracted to a confident, assertive man, her own inner masculine animus may be calling for integration. This explains why sexual desire often feels like more than physical attraction because it's the soul's longing for wholeness, using external relationships to mirror internal possibility. Those strong soldiers God has chosen, who face the most intense desires, are being called to achieve a particularly profound integration of these inner masculine and feminine energies. The sacred marriage within transforms our external relationships as well. As we integrate our own masculine and feminine aspects, we become less dependent on others to complete us. Our partnerships become more authentic and loving because they're based on wholeness, sharing with wholeness, rather than two incomplete people trying to fill each other's gaps. Jung observed that many psychological problems stem from an undeveloped relationship with our inner masculine or feminine energies. Men who reject their anima often struggle with emotional coldness or unexpressed creativity. Women who haven't integrated their animus might battle with self doubt or difficulty asserting healthy boundaries. God uses sexual desire as a powerful catalyst to bring these inner aspects into consciousness. What makes this inner marriage challenging is that much of it happens unconsciously at first. We project our unintegrated anima or animus onto others, seeing in them qualities we haven't yet claimed in ourselves. This projection creates a powerful, emotional, charged, sometimes positive fascination, attraction, sometimes negative irritation, conflict, but always pointing toward aspects of ourselves awaiting integration. Building on our work with the shadow, we can now see how those powerful sexual desires also contain clues about our inner masculine and feminine energies seeking relationship. By paying attention to exactly what qualities attract us most strongly in others, we gain insight into which aspects of our own wholeness are calling for development. This inner marriage doesn't eliminate our need for relationships with others. Instead, it transforms those connections from unconscious projections to conscious sharing. We move from using others as screens for our own inner drama to appreciating them as unique individuals. This shift marks a major milestone in spiritual development that God's chosen soldiers are especially called to achieve. The integration of anema and anemas creates a remarkable inner stability. No longer torn between competing masculine and feminine energies, we experience a new kind of psychological balance. This balance doesn't mean blandness, quite the opposite. It creates a dynamic inner harmony that allows for greater emotional range, creativity, and spiritual depth. Jung discovered that dreams and fantasies often reveal the current state of this inner marriage. When our anima or animus appears in dreams as threatening, seductive, or overwhelming, it typically indicates these energies remain unintegrated. As integration progresses, these dream figures transform, becoming allies and guides. The sexual desires that once felt compulsive gradually evolve into conscious creative energy. This transformation explains why some spiritual traditions have used sexual imagery to describe mystical experiences. The sacred marriage within parallels the soul's union with the divine. Both involve the reconciliation of opposites, the transcendence of duality, and the experience of profound wholeness. Those intense desires that God gives His strongest soldiers ultimately point toward this highest form of union. The journey toward inner marriage teaches us to honor both masculine and feminine principles in the world around us as well. We recognize how cultures suffer when they suppress either energy, just as individuals suffer when they reject parts of themselves. This growing awareness contributes to healing not just personally but collectively. As we integrate our anima or animus, our creativity naturally blossoms. We gain access to qualities and capacities previously dormant within us. Men might discover new depths of intuition, emotional sensitivity, or women might experience increased confidence, analytical clarity, or assertiveness. These gifts emerge not from external sources, but from the sacred marriage taking place within. The inner wedding isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing relationship that deepens throughout life. Each new challenge presents another opportunity to strengthen this union. Those powerful desires that God assigns to His chosen soldiers continue to serve as catalysts for growth, gradually transforming from unconscious compulsions into conscious communion. Having discovered the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, we now explore one of Jung's most fascinating concepts, synchronicity. This mysterious principle reveals how our sexual desires aren't just psychological experiences, they're meaningful coincidences that connect our inner and outer worlds, aligning our libido with our deepest purpose. Synchronicity, as Jung defined it, refers to meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect. These events reveal connections between our inner psychological state and outer circumstances. What makes this relevant to our journey is that sexual desire often creates the most powerful synchronistic experiences in our lives, especially for those strongest soldiers whom God has chosen for significant spiritual work. Think about those unexpected encounters that changed everything meeting. Someone who awakened intense desire at precisely the moment when your life needed transformation. Jung would say these aren't random accidents but meaningful alignments. The universe orchestrates these meetings to advance our spiritual development and guide us toward our purpose. Building on our understanding of anima and animus, we can now recognize how these inner energies actually attract corresponding experiences in the outer world. As you begin integrating your masculine and feminine aspects, you'll notice that your external relationships start changing in remarkable ways. People who reflect your evolving inner state appear in your life with uncanny timing. Jung observed that our libido, that powerful sexual energy we've been exploring naturally, seeks expression aligned with our true purpose. When we're disconnected from that purpose, our desires often feel chaotic or destructive. But as we grow in consciousness, our sexual energy gradually reorients itself, becoming a compass pointing toward our authentic path. This explains why sexual desire sometimes leads us into challenging situations that ultimately transform our lives. Those intense attractions that seem to derail our careful plans often contain hidden purpose, introducing us to parts of ourselves we need to develop, or removing us from paths that aren't truly ours. For God's chosen soldiers, these disruptions aren't punishments but redirections toward greater wholeness. The synchronicity of desire reveals itself through patterns. Notice how certain types of attractions repeat throughout your life, each time teaching similar lessons but at deeper levels. These patterns aren't random, they're the language of your evolving soul, using desire to communicate essential truths about your purpose. This alignment between libido and purpose often happens in stages. Initially, sexual energy might express itself in ways that seem disconnected from spiritual goals, but as integration progresses, even our most primitive desires gradually transform, becoming channels for creative and spiritual expression. The energy doesn't disappear, it evolves, finding more conscious forms of manifestation. Jung discovered that during major life transitions, synchronistic events involving sexual energy often multiply. These periods of intensified desire aren't distractions from our path, but accelerations of at times when the universe uses our most powerful motivating force to move us forward. God's strongest soldiers typically experience these accelerations with particular intensity. What makes synchronicity so powerful is that it bypasses our rational defenses. We might ignore subtle intuitions about our purpose, but it's much harder to ignore the compelling pull of desire. This is why God often speaks through this channel to those He's chosen for important work, because they'll actually pay attention. The alignment of libido with purpose creates a remarkable flow in life. Instead of sexual energy pulling in one direction and spiritual goals in another, they begin working together harmoniously. This integration produces a sense of rightness and authenticity. No longer fighting yourself, but channeling all your energy toward what truly matters. This principle transforms how we view our past as well. Those confusing or painful sexual experiences that once seemed like mistakes reveal themselves as necessary steps on our path. Each attraction served a purpose, teaching us something essential about ourselves and moving us closer to authentic alignment. Jung observed that meaningful coincidences tend to multiply around people who are actively engaged with their unconscious. As you've been working with your shadow and inner masculine feminine, and you've likely noticed strange coincidences increasing in your life. This isn't imagination, but evidence of growing alignment between your inner and outer worlds. This alignment doesn't mean sexual desire disappears into spirituality. Rather, it means these energies begin working together consciously. Your libido becomes an ally in your spiritual journey instead of a seeming opponent. For God's chosen soldiers, this partnership between desire and purpose becomes particularly powerful, enabling them to accomplish work that requires both earthly passion and spiritual vision. As your libido aligns with your purpose, you'll discover a natural way of being that doesn't require constant inner conflict. The energy once spent fighting against desire becomes available for creative and spiritual expression. This liberation marks another milestone in the journey of God's chosen soldiers' third transformation of sexual energy into the precise power needed for their unique contribution. Having explored how our desires create synchronistic patterns that align our libido with our purpose, we now arrive at the culmination of Jung's understanding: individuation through sexuality. This final stage reveals how all our work with desire decoded its language, transforming shadow into light, integrating our inner masculine and feminine, and recognizing meaningful coincidences converges in the journey toward wholeness that Jung called individuation represents the fulfillment of our unique potential as complete human beings. It's the process of becoming who we truly are, distinct from collective expectations yet connected to something greater than ourselves. What makes this relevant to our exploration is that sexuality provides one of the most powerful pathways for this journey, for those strongest soldiers whom God has chosen for the most challenging inner work. Throughout this journey, we've seen how sexual desire serves as both catalyst and compass, pushing us toward growth, while pointing toward wholeness. Now we understand the ultimate purpose behind this divine design. God assigns intense sexual challenges to his chosen soldiers precisely because these experiences, when consciously engaged, accelerate the individuation process like nothing else. Building on our exploration of synchronicity, we can now recognize how every meaningful sexual experience in our lives has been guiding us toward our unique expression of wholeness. Those powerful attractions, difficult temptations, and even painful rejections weren't random events, but stepping stones on our path to becoming fully ourselves. Jung observed that individuation isn't about achieving some idealized state of perfection. It's about embracing our humanity in all its complexity, including our sexuality. The strongest spiritual warriors aren't those who transcend their desires, but those who integrate them, transforming primitive impulses into conscious expression of their unique nature. This explains why suppressing sexuality often stunts spiritual development rather than enhancing it. When we reject this essential aspect of ourselves, we block the very energy needed for individuation. God's chosen soldiers learn to work with this energy instead of against it, allowing it to fuel their journey toward wholeness. The individuation process gradually transforms how we experience desire itself. What once felt like compulsive urges beyond our control becomes conscious choice aligned with our deepest values. Sexual energy doesn't disappear, it becomes refined, finding expression that reflects our evolving wholeness. This transformation represents the ultimate victory for God's chosen soldiers. One sign of advancing individuation is the ability to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into either extreme. Instead of swinging between suppression and indulgence, spirituality and sexuality, we learn to maintain creative balance. This capacity for holding tension creates a psychological container in which transformation happens. The lead of primitive desire into the gold of conscious love. Jung discovered that as individuation progresses, our relationship with the collective also changes. We become less defined by social expectations about sexuality and more guided by our authentic nature. This doesn't mean rejecting community standards, but rather engaging with them consciously rather than through blind conformity or rebellion. God's strongest soldiers develop this independence without losing connection. The individuated person expresses sexuality in ways that reflect their unique combination of elements, their particular integration of shadow and light, masculine and feminine, body and spirit. There's no single right expression that applies to everyone. Each person discovers the form that authentically embodies their wholeness. This diversity reflects the creative abundance of the divine working through human nature. As individuation advances, we naturally become more compassionate toward others on their sexual journeys. Having faced our own struggles honestly, we develop understanding rather than judgment. This compassion becomes another gift that God's chosen soldiers offer the world, helping others navigate their own challenges with wisdom born of experience. The journey toward wholeness reveals a profound truth. Our sexual nature and our spiritual nature aren't opposing forces but complementary aspects of the same divine design. The energy that powers our most intense desires is the same energy that fuels our highest spiritual aspirations. Learning to channel this energy consciously represents the mastery that God's strongest soldiers are called to achieve. This integration creates a remarkable inner freedom. No longer driven by unconscious compulsions or rigid prohibitions, we make choices that reflect our authentic nature. This freedom isn't license for self-indulgence, but the capacity to express our sexuality in ways that contribute to wholeness our own and others. Jung observed that in later stages of individuation, sexuality often becomes less literal and more symbolic, not necessarily diminishing in importance, but finding broader channels of expression. Creative work, deep relationships, and spiritual practice become vehicles for the same energy that once expressed itself primarily through physical desire. This evolution represents another victory for God's chosen soldiers. The individuation journey never truly ends, it continues throughout life, with each stage bringing new challenges and discoveries. But something profound shifts when we recognize sexuality as a pathway to wholeness rather than an obstacle. The war between flesh and spirit ceases. The energy once spent in internal conflict becomes available for living fully, loving deeply, and serving authentically. This is the ultimate purpose behind God's choice of His strongest soldiers, creating individuals who have transformed their most challenging desires into their greatest spiritual strength. Having walked this path themselves, they become guides for others, embodying the integration of sexuality and spirituality that makes us fully human and fully alive.